To be clear, as book to movie adaptations go, I actually think that The Hunger Games are pretty good. That said, there are a few pieces that are missing from the movies that are there in the books that I think not having them genuinely changes the way that we think about and analyze these pieces of media, especially if you're really trying to break it down and look for symbolism and recurring themes. Also, if you don't know me, hi, hello, my name is Max. I write and talk about books under the name Gemma Tate. Things that I wish had been included in the movies. The big ones for me are mostly to do with people who represent larger themes. So in that vein, Katniss's prep team from the Capitol. When we meet them, they seem like the worst stereotype of Capitol. They are bubbly, they are excited. You get the sense that they talk in like a really stereotypical Valley Girl way, like all the time, because they don't see or register the horror of the games. The games are a reality show to them that is borderline fiction, because they don't totally see people from the districts as human, even though they're interacting with them all the time. Likewise, we see that reflected in the way that anybody from the Capitol talks about or thinks about people from the districts, start to finish through the narrative if they are from the Capitol. The occasional exceptions to this are actually Effie Trinket. And we really see the shift in how she's thinking of people from the districts from Sunrise on the Reaping all the way through what we know about her by the end of Mockingjay. But the primary reason why I wish the prep team was included actually has nothing to do with the Capitol. It has to do with the way that they are treated in District 13. Because they are pulled from abysmal conditions because Katniss hears a noise and she goes, that sounds like a wounded animal, but it's not an animal because we're underground and we're in 13. That was human. I didn't like it. We're going to go check it out. And she's with Gale, who kind of looks at her and is like, don't do this, you're about to do this, really? But he knows that he can't stop her, so he goes with her anyway. And they find Katniss's prep team in shackles. Their movement has been constrained for really long amounts of time. They have sores on their wrists for under the manacles where the metal has been rubbing on their skin. And it's really telling, they're in a room where there's a drain on the floor and nothing else, and these people have not been fed, and they have been suffering. And Katniss looks at Gale and basically goes, dude, I thought that the people in District 13 were good. Why are they doing this? And then we find out that the reason why the prep team is down there is because one of them stole a single slice of bread, because these are people who are used to abundance. They have never been restricted in any way. And that was their punishment. Collective punishment, by the way. And this is also where we start to register just how biased Gale is against anybody from the Capitol, anybody who's been touched by the Capitol in any way, anybody who is not explicitly and unequivocally district. And it's a complete inversion of the way that we know anybody from the Capitol thinks about people from the districts. And it is, or at least it should be, our cue to realize that Coin is not actually better than Snow, because she not only let this happen, it is later let slip that she explicitly commanded it. So, Darius, who is a peacekeeper who frequents the Hob, and he stands up for Katniss a couple of times, and he buys a squirrel from her, and he's generally considered one of the nicer peacekeepers. Now, we don't know that he is explicitly from 12. I actually think it's safe to assume that he's not. I think it's much more likely that he is from 2, maybe even that he is from the Capitol. Most of what we know about him is that he's nice, he's chill, and importantly, what we see in his actions is actually echoed by what we see the peacekeepers in Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes do, because there was a time when it would not have been considered taboo for a peacekeeper to be friendly with folks in 12 and to buy stuff at the Hob, even like maybe slightly illegal stuff. But Darius doing those things and interacting with Katniss in a kind way is what gets him sent right back to the Capitol, and he becomes an Avox, and that is designed to punish Katniss, to make it clear to her that anybody that she gets close with in any way is going to end up in a bad situation, like immediately. Also in that vein, Lavinia, who is the Avox who is assigned to Katniss from the very beginning, she is part of Katniss's Capitol team from the very start. She's the girl who Katniss sees, in retrospect, like in the woods when she and Gale are out hunting well before the events of the 74th games start. And she's the one who's trying to run away from the Capitol. And we don't actually know much about Lavinia and her story at all, aside from the fact that she's trying to escape the Capitol with a boy, and they get caught, and there is a hovercraft in pursuit of them, and the boy gets shot with some kind of a spear gun, and Lavinia is airlifted out and taken back to the capital and turned into an Avox. But I think that they're really important for understanding how the capital think of traitors, but more importantly, people who defy them. And their presence in the story lends significantly more weight to the Avox who we meet and spend a significant amount of time with in Mockingjay. Never mind that I do think Castor and Pollux are important aspects of the story in Mockingjay, especially because you have the sort of nature-nurture of they could have been perfectly polite capital folks until bad things happened to one of them, and then the other decided to go and become a rebel, and then they both did. Not the point. Darius and Lavinia, I think, are missing from the story in a way that feels like they're missing. When I go back and rewatch the movies, I wish that they were there because they lend the narrative weight from the beginning. There's this idea of consequences attached to them that I wish was there. I am not quiet about the fact that I think that Madge Undersea being missing from the movies is the single biggest mistake that they could have made. I think that Madge is so incredibly important to the narrative because not only is she the one who gives Katniss the Mockingjay pin from the very beginning, and that is important because it is a gift from a friend who Katniss doesn't originally see as a friend. It's that first sign that, like, there is open support from people in the district that she doesn't even really see. There are people who want to be her friend. She doesn't really see it. It is in some ways a cue that Katniss is, like, maybe not the most reliable of narrators ever because she is not the greatest at understanding social cues. But it's also important because Madge is Maysilee Donner's niece, and we learn so much about how the games work and how propaganda and editing around the games work through Maysilee and through Sunrise. And I think it's going to be really difficult for the movies to connect that and to really land with the full weight of who Maysilee was and why she matters without Madge having been in the narrative from the start. I think by the time that we get around to Sunrise on the Reaping, it is going to be difficult to make the impact of Maysilee's story land with the impact that it should have because Madge is so important to those first two books. And then not having the backstory connect to her, it'll matter because Maysilee is a well-written character. And I'm sure whoever they cast will play her absolute abject bitchiness in a way that lands. But I don't think it will land in terms of the narrative weight the way that it should and arguably needs to. I also think that Madge is important because we get a couple of really key pieces of information from her. One, we get a sense of how the affluent live in 12. And Madge is our only character with a really direct window into that because we know that even Peeta's family, they're merchants, but they're not aristocracy. Madge's family is never hurting for money, but, this is a really important but, Madge's family is also representative of the fact that even if you are part of the aristocracy, even if you are part of the government, if you are district, there is still no upward mobility for you into the capital. There's a line in Catching Fire where Madge says, "Oh, look at you, like you just came off the streets of the capital." And Katniss's response is basically, "Well, you're the mayor's daughter. Can't you go to the capital?" Likewise, Madge is able to get medicine for her mother. It's Morphling because her mother is Maysilee Donner's twin sister and suffers from debilitating headaches. And Katniss goes, "Oh, so you just have access to capital meds." And what Madge says in response is really telling. The mayor's family does not go to the capital. The mayor is occasionally summoned. There's no upward class mobility by the time we get to the 74th and 75th games, the way that there was for a family like the Plinths around the time of the 10th games in A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Because Sejanus's family was the wealthiest family in District 2, and they get to the capital. There is enough upward mobility that is possible in this society, in Panem, that the Plinths can buy their way into the capital. And they're not necessarily fully accepted, but we get the sense that a generation or two down, they would have been had Sejanus, survived the circumstances that Snow set him up for, whatever. But by the time we get to Madge and her family, that kind of mobility is not possible for them. And it doesn't really seem like it's possible for anybody from a more capital-oriented district like 1 or 2 either. Remember, District 1 is the first of the districts to completely turn and side with the rebels against the Capitol. So I think that that's really interesting, and I think we learn a lot about that through Madge and through Katniss's friendship with Madge. And I think that the narrative is worse off for her not being in it. I'm also gonna go ahead and say Joanna Mason, who, like, I recognize is in the movies, but the depth of her relationship with Katniss isn't. And the way that the books really show, A, the damage that she's gone through in the Capitol, but B, the way that her damage and Katniss's damage somehow make them fit as friends, and the way that they help each other through their recovery processes. Like, there's this really lovely moment in the books where Katniss realizes that Joanna doesn't have anything to remind her of home, and so she goes up above ground and comes back with pine needles, and Joanna's like super bitchy about it, but she ends up putting them in her drawer so that her drawer smells like home. And there's this depth of a relationship that develops between the two of them because they are both victors, they are both survivors, but Katniss still has people who she loves, people who are relying on her in a way that Joanna doesn't. So they decide to become each other's family in a way. And it's not really just the two of them, it's Katniss, Joanna, and Finnick. And they decide to be siblings to each other, to be family to each other. And I think that it's really kind of key to Katniss's development and healing process through Mockingjay. I also really do wish, and not like in a weird trauma porn kind of way, I really do wish that Peeta's amputation had been included in the movies because it feels like a missing piece. Towards the end of the 74th games, really just past the midpoint, Peeta's leg is horribly infected from where Cato cut him on his way out of the careers. And Katniss looks at it and goes, oh, that is super infected. You are not going to survive this if I do not get you medicine. And so she drugs him and goes to the cornucopia to get the medicine. And it's really, really important because A, it's where we have the interaction between Katniss and Clove, where we realize that Clove is also a scared little girl trying to go home to her family. She's a terrifying scared little girl, but that's what she is. And we also get the sense that maybe Clove and Cato are like a what could have been version of Katniss and Peeta. It's also where we get the interaction between Katniss and Thresh, and they have that little exchange about not wanting to owe anybody, and it's really, really important. And that exchange is there in the movies. So I think, it's been a minute since I rewatched the first one, is Peeta's leg being injured. However, there's a recurring sentiment from Peeta through the first book that he doesn't want the games to change him forever. He knows that it's likely, but he doesn't want the games to change who he is fundamentally at his core. And obviously we know that he does end up changing pretty significantly. He ends up also plagued with nightmares. He ends up also just horribly damaged. And the hijacking is also another really important piece of like absolute horrible damage because he doesn't want to be just a piece in somebody else's games, and that's exactly what he ends up being. However, what the movies cut out is that he is also physically altered by the games forever because his leg cannot be saved at the end of the 74th games because he actively tries to end it for himself because Katniss has put a little tourniquet around his leg and she's like, look, this is fine. You're just going to hold on until they get us both out of here because we are both the victors. And when the bell goes off and we hear the announcement that's like, oh, no, it's actually only going to be one of you, Peeta tries to end it all by himself. Katniss's first impulse is to draw an arrow and aim it at him. His first impulse is just to take off the tourniquet. And that is A, really telling about who Peeta is, but B, after the little stunt with the berries, Peeta's leg cannot be saved. By the time they get to the interview stage after the games, it is clear that it has been replaced by a prosthetic, and that is a reminder to Peeta forever that the games have functionally changed him physically. And that also comes back to bite everybody in the ass in Catching Fire, because it's the reason why Mags doesn't make it out of the fog. Because Finnick and Katniss are required to carry Mags out of the fog or to carry Peeta out of the fog. With his prosthetic leg, he can't move as fast as they can, and they have to make a choice. It is either going to be Peeta or Mags who makes it out, and Mags makes the choice for them, and it's heartbreaking. And it lends a little bit more logic to it than there is initially in the movies. I think it's also, if we're looking at it in terms of foreshadowing, I think it's also really a telling point that Peeta is not going to make it out unscathed. And if we look at the events of Mockingjay as a third games, or the 76th games, the way that Katniss does, Peeta already didn't make it out of the first games unscathed. He sure doesn't make it out of his second games unscathed. There was no way he was going to make it out of his third ones unscathed either, thus the hijacking. Suzanne Collins really loves a good foreshadowing moment, and I refuse to believe that the amputated leg and replacement of it with a prosthetic is not in some ways a really clear indicator of what was going to happen with something like hijacking, where a piece of Peeta was going to be removed and replaced with something else, and he was going to have to learn and adapt and figure out how to live with that piece. And it's just a layer of complexity to the story that I do feel is missing by not being included in the movies. I already have a whole video up about Bonnie and Twill and the significance of their chapter in Catching Fire. I really do wish it had been included because it tells us so much about what rebellion looks like outside of District 12. And it tells us so much about what Katniss has come to mean to other people who are part of this rebellion. But it also tells us how much Katniss doesn't know. And it's really telling about the way that the rebellion functions and the degree to which they are willing to use her without giving her any agency in how she's being used. And if you want that video, feel free to go watch it. I'm not going to go on about it too much here. But I think that chapter with Bonnie and Twill is much more important than most casual readers of the books who read the books once and then just went and watched the movies and used that as their primary way of analyzing the material, or people who have only watched the movies realize. Another character who I think is really missing from the narrative in a way that, like, yes, makes sense for people who make movies, Sejanus's mother. And specifically the fact that she's only ever referred to as Ma Plinth. I think that she's really key. The way that Snow interacts with her in Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is really key to understanding the way that Snow thinks about mothers, particularly because he doesn't super have one. And we have a couple of really key important symbols for how Snow thinks about family. We have the compass from his father and the compact from his mother. And when he's really hanging on to that compact and using that as like his symbol and his guide and his mirror, he can literally see his own reflection in it. He's thinking about being a good person. But by the time he starts interacting with Ma, the only symbol of his past that he's really still hanging on to is his father's compass, like, you know, his father's broken moral compass, because Crassus Snow was not a good person. And when he starts interacting with Ma, it is explicitly to use her, because she is district. And she cares about him, but she's district. And the fact that she's Ma and not mother to Sejanus, again, district. And we find, this is Snow's internal monologue, we find him just like looking down on her over and over again, even when she is trying to help him. This brings me to the sort of maybe biggest item on this list. Snow's internal monologue being missing from the movie version of Ballad, I think is a poor choice, because I don't think that we would be getting nearly as many Tom Blythe as Snow thirst edits if it had been included, because there's this idea that the movie almost presents that, like, maybe the breakup between Lucy Gray and Snow is the reason why he went crazy. Maybe it's the reason why he became a terrible, horrible dictator. His internal monologue in the books makes it so incredibly clear he was always going to turn out that way, because his internal monologue sounds like that from chapter 1. It is literally in the first handful of pages where he is thinking about his own cousin, who is the closest thing he has to a sister, in terms of transactions, and wondering how much her body would sell for. Like, he's not a good person. It is made very clear that helping Lucy Gray is for the sake of the Plinth Prize. It is for the sake of getting a good grade so that he can get a nice scholarship, and she's district. And that is a reason to look down on her. He does not start fully thinking of her as human at any point in the story. He does occasionally think of her in terms of ownership. It's not good. Also, speaking of ballad, there is another piece there that I wish had been included in the movies, or at least I wish it had been portrayed differently in the movies, and that is the beginning of the games. Because keep in mind, it's the 10th games. These are kids who have not spent their entire lives with the games in them. There are kids in the games who remember a time before the games. And the 10th Hunger Games do not begin with a bloodbath in the book. The kids just kind of stand around and like some of them reach half-heartedly for a weapon, but they have not yet grown used to the normalized spectacle of a show that the 74th and 75th games clearly are, and even the 50th. Because they don't really have a plan for how they're just going to wander into an arena and kill each other. None of them want to do it. None of them want to be there. And it's a really clear theme that carries through to Coral, the girl from District 4, who when she realizes that she's not going to win, she just kind of looks around bewildered and goes, I can't have done all of this for nothing. I can't have killed them all for nothing. And it's so heartbreaking, and it's such an important reminder that all of these kids are victims. Not just the kids from 12, not just the kids from 8. All of them are victims, including 1, 2, and 4, the careers. I think it's so, so important. And I also think it's important to register just how much the games change and become normalized from the 10th to the 50th to the 74th. And I just wish that it had been included. It adds a layer of depth and complexity that makes the story more interesting, and that also makes the weight and impact of these really carefully thought through elements hit so much harder as a reader. Anyway, those are things that I wish had been included. What's something that you noticed that's missing from the books and you wish was in the movies? If I missed your favorite, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, please make sure that you like, please make sure that you subscribe, and I will catch y'all in the next one. Bye.